Hey there. Welcome to Storytime. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar. I'm going to move this back just a little bit. I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And I'm really excited, oddly enough, to talk about Romans chapter 1 and part of chapter 2 today with everyone. But first, I want to cover a couple of quick things. Okay, good. I appreciate a little chat going on here. Someone had mentioned they actually wanted to help as a moderator. And so if that was you, find another way to let me know that was you. I've figured out how to do that, and I appreciate people being helpful in that kind of a way. So please do speak up about that. Yeah, thank you to all the people who are supporting me already. I need to be a little bit better about thanking folks, I think. I'm there. You're supporting me just by being here. You're supporting me by liking, by sharing, by getting notifications so that you're reminded to come be here, or any of the other YouTube channels that you're tracking with. So subscribing, all that. But also, I'm grateful to those who are wanting to and are able to support me through Patreon. My handle is @biblicalbird, and I appreciate that. It's not just the financial boost, but also the kind of the you're in my corner boost. So I appreciate all of that. Next week, just as a heads up, I'm going to have a colleague on, Shelley Matthews, and I'm not entirely sure which part of her scholarship we'll end up talking about, but she's done a lot of work around the book of Acts, as well as the issue of violence in the Newer Testament and early Christianity. And she's dealt with the martyrdom of Stephen and through the lens of it being depicted and therefore a part of depicted as being anti-Judaic, and then also a part of that kind of a longer thread or trajectory of anti-Judaism within the Newer Testament and early Christianity. And, that is a thread that has never broken. So it'll be a fun conversation. She is a lovely person, and I'm grateful she's coming on next week, Shelley Matthews. Let's see. I feel like there was something else. Oh, yes. Okay, so I also am finally putting together a couple of videos of me teaching content on Paul. So they'll be about an hour each, I think. I tend to have more to say than I realize, so it might go. They might be a little bit longer than an hour, but and I'm curious about titles and how fun or playful I should be versus how direct I should be. And so, since it's a video, but it's also content, right? I'm put up a comment actually. So let me go ahead and share the page in my community section of my YouTube channel, just asking for feedback. Right now, my working title is 4 Things Everyone Should Know About Paul and His Letters, because sometimes it's helpful to be really direct. And then the other title I was working with before was Making Sense of Paul and His Letters. And so, or do you have any other suggestions? I appreciate feedback and kind of hearing what people who follow my work or appreciate my work already have to say about something like this. So any input is appreciated. Let's see. Right. Okay, so that's the video title, and hopefully this will be out actually like next week or so. We'll see how soon I can get that wrapped up. So that'll be good. Okay, so today we're talking about Romans chapter 1. And I think I may have done some of this before or previously, but I keep coming back because I'm now working on Paul again and trying to get to the book eventually on him. I wanted to. I think it's also because I've had some conversations recently that with people who were reading Paul still quite positivistically. So what I mean by that is reading with the grain. So not challenging what he's saying, but finding ways to accommodate or just play nice with it. And so I honestly, I don't remember. I don't remember why I decided to do this today, but I guess there are all kinds of factors, right? So hello to everybody in the chat. It's really nice to see you all here. I appreciate you being here. All right, so I'm not gonna put the text up on the screen today because I'm trying not to center Paul. It's a very intentional choice. I sat here beforehand debating, am I gonna put the words on the screen so everybody can see it while we talk about it or not? And I decided not because that's part of what I'm trying to do here is to not center Paul so much. So somehow the visual it works for me. I don't know. Okay, so here we go. Excuse me. Okay. Oh, it's interesting. We're getting some suggestions in the chat even. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's input. Okay. So Romans chapter 1. I feel like asking for those of you who are here, what are your first thoughts about like what kinds of thoughts do you have about Romans chapter 1 just in general? I imagine knowing something about some of you, it has been used against some of you here directly, and then others who are just kind people know that it's been harmful to people around them. I'm just wondering, what have you been told? How have you been told to make sense of Romans chapter 1, for instance? Any part of it? Oh my goodness, that's fun. Some of the comments. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's not better to call Saul. Back to the title suggestions. Okay. Anyway, so I'm trying to stall a little bit because I know that it takes a couple seconds for me to say it and then for you all to see it or hear it. And but I want to kind of engage your thoughts a little bit before I keep going. So, oh, interesting. I didn't know this. Trent, and hi Trent. Also, it's nice to see you. I haven't seen you here, but that doesn't mean you haven't been here. But I just haven't been paying attention in chat for a while. Latter-day Saints don't talk about Paul. I'm just fascinated by that. Romans 1 was always harsh to me, even when I was a believer. Thank you. Thank you for that. Considering anew. Hi there. What else? Let's see. That might be all we get for now because it's anyway. Okay, so we'll see if there's more if there are more comments posted raised. Thank you for chiming in, James. I appreciate that. Raised in Jehovah's Witness fundamentalist house, taught the standard fundamentalist tropes about Romans and salvation, but I read it differently now. Okay. I think part of why I wanted to do this was, I think in part it was triggered by this, I don't mean in a bad way, the conversation I had, both the conversation I had recently on History Valley, with a colleague, with someone in the field of New Testament studies, and we had a very different way of engaging the comment or the conversation around whether Paul is misogynistic in his letters, and talking about the rhetoric. So talking about the rhetoric got me thinking about talking about Romans 1 and 2. Goodness. I'm not sure what's going on with my throat today. Partly because maybe to cut to the chase a little bit, I know that a lot of people like to look at the fact that Paul does what seems to be some form of a in chapter 2, some form of a, well, but nobody gets to judge, so stop being your judgy self. Like he has this comment that, like, or this way of kind of saying nobody gets to judge, yada yada, as if that language and that kind of turn makes it okay what we have in Romans chapter 1. And I just don't think it does. And so that's kind of that's part of what I'm doing here today. Okay, I think there's some more content here. The stuff about how people should know God is real because of creation, and the comments on homosexuality always made me wanna skip Romans 1. Way to go, Nicaea 7. I don't know if that was a personal or just you just knew that wasn't legit on some level. Here's another comment. I wish Roman road meant we were gonna learn about their excellent road movie. That's awesome, Melissa. Oh my gosh, your icon is it's just fantastic. This little light of mine. I'm a big dumpster fire. Thank you for that laugh. That was really helpful. Let's see. My thoughts about it are words I would apologize for. Are not words you're gonna put in the chat. Is that what you're saying, Anina? Thank you for that. And we have Susan Cameron chiming in as well. Hi, Susan. I hate Romans since, oh gosh, had to live through a Calvinist preacher preaching. Oh my word. I can't even process that. 2 years on oh goodness, I am so pained for you on that, and oh, so many thoughts, so many thoughts. And also, what a fantastic glimpse at into what I think people, like what I'd like to say to people about Paul. Just the way people make such a big deal out of one or two phrases, one or two words strung together, a phrase, a line, an idea. And Romans itself is absolutely not clear, which is why it's such a big deal for people to get it right, right? Goodness, Susan, I am so sorry. That is just yeah, I believe this, right? It's been used against you in some very negative ways. Yes, and I am very sorry about that, Anina, and thank you for speaking up. Also, I'm sorry, and I'm glad that you know that that was just wrong and inappropriate. Yeah. Roman road. I wish we were about their road building. That's good stuff. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started now. How about that? I feel like there's still something I'm not remembering to say, but anyway, I'm very excited about this this little course or whatever video course on Paul. Very excited to pull that together. Okay, so I'm just reading from the beginning. I'm using a New Revised Standard Version. I don't have an updated edition in print form, and so I'm just using what I have, and it's fine. I think it's close enough. I have my Greek next to me, but we're good. So one of the things to know about Paul is that he was absolutely okay with enslavement. He says it many times, and I'm going to have to go through and find all the references for this video, but for the video series. But he starts out by calling himself a slave of Christ. Paulos, doulos Christou Jesu. Paul, a slave of Christ. So don't tell me that he was trying to undo slavery. And don't tell, just don't even go there. No. Anyway, Paul, a slave of, and the NRSV actually says servant, and they put it in the footnote that it's actually slave in the Greek. Funny, interesting point for you all to know or to think about. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time when you see servant in the Newer Testament, it's actually to doulos, which is an enslaved role. Moving on. Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle. Apostle is different than disciple, right? Apostle comes from the verb to send, right? So an apostle is someone who goes out, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. I'm going to pause to comment on the fact that the book of Romans is the latest of the genuine letters of Paul, right? So he has had lots of time to develop his own thoughts about these things and to come up with that system that he's referring to in terms of what he is taking from the prophets to talk about or to think about who Jesus could be in terms of making him a Messiah. Because Jesus, as a Jewish man who was executed by the Romans, did not fill the role of Messiah from a Jewish perspective. So what Paul came up with, and I very much think it's important that we keep in mind that Paul came up with these ideas, however he was inspired for them, it's fine by me, but or whatever, we can debate that, and there's no way to know. But he came up with the ideas. He was not working with ideas that had been put together like this before, right? And it took some time to develop. So, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, the gospel concerning his son, who was descended from David according to the flesh, and was declared to be Son of God with the power according to the Spirit of holiness by resurrection from the dead. I'm going to pause. This is all a very long sentence, isn't it? It's unusual. Okay, but I want to comment on something. When Paul says that this guy Jesus who was descended from David according to the flesh, that's a really fun little nugget to play with, isn't it? Because first of all, we don't have any of the Gospels written yet, right? So we don't have the genealogies that Matthew and Luke add to the beginning of the Gospel. Mark doesn't have a genealogy. Mark just starts out at the moment of Jesus being called, to go out or whatever, being tested in the desert and baptized in the Jordan, right? So we don't have the whole, that whole genealogy bit. We don't have, and also, by the way, when you look at the genealogy, both in Matthew and Luke, he's not actually descended from either line if you take the idea that Joseph wasn't actually his biological father. So there's just so many fascinating things going on here. It's fun. Like every time it just kind of my head starts spinning. I'm like, oh my gosh, what he was saying versus what they had to make things work later because of what he's saying. But then they also were working with these other ideas they had to make sense of. Anyway, so was declared to be Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord, through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles for the sake of his name, including yourselves who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. When I teach a Hebrew Bible intro course, I try to get, in particular, people who come from a Christian background, whether or not they're still identifying with it, I try to get them to consider that for the ancient Hebrew people, Israelite people, then Jews and so forth, that keeping the law is not about obedience as much as it is about listening to the propositions and choosing to obey and choosing to live accordingly. But it becomes because I'm trying to get people who've been taught to think negatively of this ancient tradition to consider it more lovingly and to see it through a different lens. And when I read something like this from Paul, who was a Jew, talking about obedience, the centrality of obedience, I don't even like it when people talk about dogs obeying. I mean, I get it. I get the whole training that needs to take place and the dynamics we have going on there between dogs and humans or whatever, and that there's some things to work with there, but it's more of a love anyway. It still makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I get it, right? But when you're talking about a religious tradition or people in relationship to their God, and that the primary way of talking about it is obedience, that I just I just need to sit with it. I need to point it out and sit with it for a minute, okay? Because it just makes me uncomfortable. The obedience of faith among all the Gentiles for the sake of his name. I'm not sure that I looked at the Greek there specifically ahead of time. Given grace, into obedience of faith. Yeah, which, and some of his constructions here just don't make a whole lot of sense, right? Um, ice, hupakoin, ice, hupakoin pisteus, right? It doesn't even make a whole lot of sense, but into obedience of faith. Um, so what I'm trying to highlight, at each time I pause like this, is that the way that Paul imagines or talks about this thing, whatever it is, and I think of it as a sect of Judaism that is all about bringing the Gentiles into the covenant. And I think that he was interested in doing that from day, to his dying day, and that he considered himself a Jew to his dying day, because Jews don't stop being a Jew, right? So I'm trying to highlight his framework, some of his own presuppositions, regardless, totally aside from whether or not the claims are a form of judgment or whatever. Just how is he imagining the world works? Okay, so let's keep going. To all God's beloved in Rome, who are called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. So, I think that there's something really powerful in the way that people have internalized his language and haven't been given a space in which to challenge it or to reconsider it, because most people just don't, right? And it's important in a Christian setting to agree with Paul, right? So now we're going to get into his bizarre name calling. Okay, now we've got some fun chatter, so it's not specifically about what I'm doing, which is great. Okay, so now verse 8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed throughout the world. So he's talking to the people in Rome. For God, whom I serve with my spirit by announcing the gospel of his Son, is my witness that without ceasing I remember you always in my prayers, asking that by God's will I may somehow at last succeed in coming to you. For I am longing to see you, so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, or rather, so that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I want you to know, brothers, and the NRSV says brothers and sisters, and then has a footnote indicating that the Greek just says brothers. So I'm just saying brothers. I want you to know, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as I have among the rest of the Gentiles. That's a really interesting thing to say up front, isn't it? And, like, maybe he should be leading some seminars on how to just be really bold and just ask for the money, but that's what this letter is in part about, right? He's not just laying out all of his ideas around salvation and law and how it works, that you have Gentiles who are part of the covenant, but they don't have to behave according to the laws, which are what the covenant was based upon initially. So there's a reason that he has to work out the law thing. I mean, there's a good reason, right? But he's also, we're in verse 10 or 12 or whatever, and he's talking about, I want to get a handout from you. Now, he talks about taking a collection for people in Jerusalem, so it's not just about him, but he's also very clear that his the things he's doing, he is dependent on others to make it happen. And in the closing chapter, when normally you would just say hey to everyone for me, he gives that long list of people who are prominent in the community, and he lists a Ms. Moneybags Phoebe first, right? And he commends her. He doesn't commend people, you know? So this letter is also about raising money, right? It's about he's laying out his thoughts, but it's first and last, it's about I'm coming to you and I'm hoping you're gonna give me some support. I really want people to be clear about that he's not, you know, it's not just he wants them to fund his travels to Spain. You know, like, he's asking for money, and who knows what he'll end up doing with it, right? I just think of, you know, people on TV who ask for funds and things, and I just think it's really interesting. I also ask people to support me. So, like, I get that there's, you know, like, I'm making this observation, and I'm also in that situation. Um, you know, so it's complicated, right? So he says these things, I have often intended to come to you in order that I may reap some harvest among you, as I have among the rest of the Gentiles. So he's clearly thinking he's talking to Gentiles here who are a part of now this sect of Judaism. I am a debtor both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish, hence my eagerness to proclaim the gospel to you also who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith. I was looking at the Greek of that, and that's not a thing I want to get into, but it is it's one of the phrases that people get really hung up on. To the Jew first, and also to the Greek, for in it, okay, here's where it starts to get interesting. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed through faith for faith. And he's talking about the gospel here. It is written, as it is written, the one who is righteous will live by faith. This is another phrase that we spent a lot of time on in seminary, in the course on Paul. The Greek there, hodidikaios ekpisteos zeisetai. It's one of those, the one who is righteous from faith will live out of faith. It's really not clear what, but he's quoting a saying that's already out there. And the very next line, for the wrath of God, this is Romans chapter 1, verse 18. The wrath of God is revealed. I just want to sit with that for a moment. Paul believes that God is wrathful. I'm just not okay with that. I don't want to keep reading. Like, I just don't want to keep reading. That he believes that, right? I'm not sure I'll be able to get through this. I'm starting to kind of emotionally connect with it. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of those who by their wickedness suppress the truth. I'm going to say it now. I'm going to say it again in a minute. When he has this very dualistic way of talking about things, righteous versus ungodliness or wickedness, that isn't helpful, in my opinion, because nobody is pure one or the other. Okay, there's one thing. Another is that the way he talks, as I was reading through it this afternoon, prepping for this, makes it sound like if you're of the right belief system, you're going to be righteous. That if you have done some things that maybe you're not real proud of, that's because you didn't have the right beliefs. That doesn't hold up. You know what I mean? Like, people who are practicing whichever tradition, but I can say practicing Christians can also be can also do some terrible things. They can be deceitful. They can be crafty. They can be gossips, they can be boastful, they can, right? They all the things um, that are listed in at the end of chapter 1. So he sets up a false comparison or false categories of humans to begin with, okay? And then what someone commented on at the beginning about all these things about different different belief systems. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't know what other religious traditions Paul actually encountered. Did he actually encounter Buddhists or um, Hindus? Like, did he? I don't know. And he would have been probably right the way I was when I was initially exposed to Hinduism or Buddhism. And I just remember having judgmental thoughts and that they were wrong. And that because they weren't practicing what I believed and practiced, that they were wrong. And therefore, right, they had all these issues, right? Just fundamentally, there was something wrong with people who had other religious traditions and practices. And I came by that belief system and that way of thinking, honestly, in part because of something like this in Romans chapter 1. Right? Okay, so I'm trying to picture what he's attacking. So when he says in verse 19, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them." You know, I wanna ask Paul, what's the God he's talking about, right? Like, what is God that you think is plain to everyone? And I imagine it's gonna be something pretty close to what we have depicted in the Hebrew Bible, because that's how he talks about God. He talks about God as being loving, but also quite wrathful, and it's that wrath that he uses to try to get people to behave. And that is not the only message we're given about God in the Hebrew Bible at all. I have a video, right? The way God is depicted in both testaments is both ways, right? So it's and it's this different content, but I can share that. I just don't have right. I don't have the link ready to share right now, but it's in the professionally developed academic content playlist if you want to go check it out. But anyway, um, what is the God he's talking about? And it makes me cranky because I am pretty sure if there's a concept of God that I could get on board with, it's not going to look anything like what he's thinking of. And so he is judging everybody who doesn't agree with him. And he's asserting that his beliefs about the whole situation are correct. And so if you're a part of this community that has been handed down all these scriptures, the community itself has embraced his claims as right. So for what can be known about God is plain because God has shown it to them. That's a really interesting claim to make with certainty, right? Ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. This from the man who also talks about us not being mature enough to understand the things of God. I mean, what is on another level, if we really just want to look at the things around us and see what God is, it's looking much closer to what I see in Octavia Butler's definition of God, which is God is change. Because that is the one constant in the world, and in particular when you look at nature, right? Nature is about developing, growth, death, the cycle of life, but change. Change is the one constant in nature. But I don't think that's what Paul's talking about. So, all right. So he's making these claims that people um, have we can see these things about God. These things have been understood and seen through the things God is male, also here, right, has made. So All these people who deny all of this, are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. Which I want to pause on, I guess, just to kind of give it some space here, give it a little air. They, though they knew who God was, they did not honor him as God. Maybe because the way God is talked about in these scriptures is kind of cruel, and they liked themselves too much to be obedient to that. I don't know. Like they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. So the only way you're going to be futile in your thinking is if you don't believe the things about God that Paul says are true. Is that the only way? No, that's not what he's saying. But it's also, right, I mean, it's also that he's right. I mean, he's judging other people's lives through the lens of what he thinks is right. Futile in their thinking. It's really interesting. I guess there's not much more to say here on this, but I have people every now and then who jump on my videos and refer to me this way, like, oh, it's amazing what your darkened minds will bring you to, and all this kind of really kind of rude. Doesn't bother me, because they're the ones with a problem. There's so much going on here. Claiming to be wise, they become fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human being, or birds, or four-footed animals, or reptiles. So this is where I got to go to Athens many moons ago, 2008. And coming face to face with these statues and temples and representations of the divine realm using reptiles or four-footed animals or birds, or you look at a statue, and unless you know that, you can't always tell if that's a statue of a human or a god. Like, you don't always, like, you have to be in the know. You have to, right? I mean, Dionysius doesn't look like a god necessarily. He looks like a drunken fool, right? And so he is literally judging every other religious tradition on the planet, because they all use, aside from the 3 monotheistic traditions based upon Abraham, they all use images and, and animals. And it's a fundamental element of the visualization of religious ideas. And so, it's just stunning. But he's judging, and he gets to be right about it, and teaches other people to think that these kinds of behaviors are futile in thinking. It's not a small thing. Therefore, so all of this is going on because people have known who God was, but didn't honor that God. Therefore, because God has been rejected or not honored, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity. Okay. First of all, we're depicting God as a puppet master. So that's one thing to think about. God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity. There's more to say, obviously, in this, because I know a lot of you know this part pretty well. But I just want to pause on this for a minute. So God is being petty because he has not been honored and revered. He is causing or allowing, however you want to see that. God gave them up. God handed them over somehow, right? God like did this thing in the lusts of their hearts to impurity. So Paul, as far as we can tell, has a pretty strict understanding of purity and impurity when it comes to sex. And as I've noted before, fascinating that it doesn't that is talked about separately from ritual purity, even though they are actually intimately related. But that's another point for a different day. So Paul doesn't Paul isn't really comfortable with a lot of bodily functions and bodily desires. And so when he talks about people lusting in their hearts and the lust of their hearts led them to impurity, to the degrading of their bodies among themselves. So what is degrading to Paul it's not clear, but it is also, we know that for him, it is based in the honor shame framework that helps to define masculinity and femininity, or male, what is a true male supposed to act like versus a female. And that even in intercourse, even in sexual intimacy, physical sexual intimacy, a man was still supposed to be dominant and strong or active, and a woman was supposed to be passive, submissive. Just like their relationship, right? How things play out in the bedroom is how the whole relationship works, right? And so when we get to this content about people degrading their bodies, what we get in the next, degrading passions, the right or wrong type of intercourse, this is predominantly based in a sexism which defines masculinity and femininity, or being a man or a woman. And again, I'm not interested in perpetuating a binary here. Personally, I'm using binary language to talk about humans because that's what he's doing, but I very much affirm a spectrum, some realities beyond the binary. So I just want to make that clear. But what he's doing, I'm having to deal with this language because that's what he's doing. So he talks about the degrading of their bodies among themselves. So what is degrading for Paul is quite possibly just a normal, natural interaction between two people. It could even be in a hetero situation, right? He's not, or he's jumped to the lusts of their hearts. So he's talking about sexuality first, and then he gets to this long list, which is also worth noting. Right? So what is degrading to him could simply just be normal interactions, right? Okay. So therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the degrading of their bodies among themselves, because this is why they had exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who was blessed forever. Amen. And this is a false way of talking about when you have a visual that helps you focus in worship. So if you have a statue, an icon, a whatever, that thing, in certain settings, it may be that people think that the spirit of the God indwells this item, but it is also about directing your attention to the God. So he is misrepresenting what people are doing. And the thing is, I can believe that he doesn't realize that he's misrepresenting. Like, I can believe that because I was trained by this way of thinking, and I didn't think I was misrepresenting. Like, I didn't think it was a misrepresentation. It's just clear that they're doing this, and that's wrong. So, how good was he at understanding other cultures? Not necessarily top on his list. You know what I'm saying? He was not a director of DEI. Know what I'm saying? Okay. So we're making really fascinating claims about who God is, that God would hand people over into something that then God is going to judge them for. And it's all based on the fact that they don't want to worship this God. Okay. So for this reason, so we're building, right? These things, people ignored what was plain to them to see. And so because of that, God handed them over to lustful passions. And for this reason, God gave them up to, sorry, that's the next line. God gave them up again, right? I could look up that verb real quick, but I'd need to look it up in the paradocan. Oh, well, yeah, okay. Yeah, he gave them over, handed them over. So to degrading pathe, degrading passion. That's not plural, it's singular. That's interesting. Oh, I was in the wrong verse, I think. Nope. Nope. It's just singular, not passions. So again, Paul thinks of passion. I say again, I haven't said it in this live stream, but I have said it elsewhere, and I think many people watching this already know. But Paul talks about passion as a problem. It is not something that we indulge if we are, you know, it isn't something to be indulged. It's something to restrain. It's something to put a lid on. And so when he talks in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 about passion, and that if you're burning with passion, it's better to marry, that's because he thinks that marrying, and that which would allow you to have sex, would then put a lid on the passion. Not, it isn't the place to indulge and enjoy the passion. It's a way. Marriage is what will help you put the passion out, keep control of your passion. So for him, saying degrading passions is a little bit redundant, okay? He's not making a distinction between passions that are good and passions that are degrading. He's saying that passions are degrading. So God is giving people over, handing them up, or I don't know why the translation is up. That's an interesting, anyway, handing them over to degrading passions. Again, what is he saying about who God is and how God functions like a puppet master? Just like we saw in Exodus, with God hardening the heart of Pharaoh in order for God to flex. I mean, that's just a fascinating story to hold on to and to perpetuate, right? It serves some really interesting purposes initially, but goodness, we've moved past that, haven't we? So God gave them up to passions which are degrading, according to Paul. And I'll just make sure you understand, I do not agree with him. I think that there's something important about self-discipline and self-control, and there are appropriate times for things like that is important, right, in this conversation. But to just call passions degrading is a body negative thing to say, right? I had a video out recently talking about the Paul is sex negative, right? He is sex negative, he is body negative. And someone asked, do you think that maybe Paul was asexual, and that's why he spoke so negatively about it all? I was like, that's an interesting suggestion. I wonder if someone's looked into that. I don't know if there's a way to do that, but all right. So anyway, Paul is down on these things. And then he continues in verse 26. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. So what does he mean by that? That goes back again to the beliefs about humans and what is natural for women, or typical, or what we should expect of women in sex, which is an interesting thing to talk about at all if you are Paul, who claims to be celibate. Right? So he just does a lot of listening to other people talk about their sex lives. I don't know, right? But what he's talking about, women giving up natural intercourse for unnatural, he's talking about women being active in sex. That's what we're talking about. Like, whether or not he also is including two women having sex together doesn't even matter to me, because he is this element. What is much deeper for him, in what I can see in his writings, is this element of behaviors, practices, behaviors, things that we're supposed to do, right? If we're talking about a woman giving up natural intercourse for unnatural, natural for a woman is to be passive. That's that's and it's really kind of frightening how many people still think that. And in the same way, also the men giving up natural intercourse with women were consumed with passion for one another. Obviously, this is a verse that is quite problematic for just in general. But of course, when this is read as being true, and both of these verses read as being true about humans, this is what people have been, beaten up with, are verses 26 and 27. Let me read through it. For this reason, God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural. And in the same way, also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. I really would normally read that with a really angry tone because that's how I think he's thinking as he writes this. God gave them up to degrading passions. Their women exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way, also the men, giving up natural intercourse with women, were consumed with passion for one another. Ugh. Men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. If you believe that sex is only for procreation, sex needs to be potentially procreative. If you believe these things, then of course you're going to think that the only kind of sex that a human would be inclined to have is going to be hetero. And when he talks about shameless acts that men commit with men, this is as much about misogyny as it is about gay sex between two men. He's talking about men allowing themselves to be penetrated. He's talking about a man penetrating another man. That is the problem, right? That a man would allow himself to be in the passive role. That's what women are supposed to do, right? That's at the heart of it for him, which is a form of misogyny, right? The element that I don't, there's no way to know specifically what he's talking about, but I do think that part of it, at least, when it talks about received in their own persons the due penalty for their error, I do think it is likely that that's also him judging effeminate men, which is, again, a form of misogyny. So, I did a conversation with someone about whether or not I thought Paul is misogynistic. I'm like, well, yes and no. I was on a different podcast. We recorded this just a couple days ago. It won't be out for another month or so. Heretic Happy Hour. And one of the first questions Matt posed to me, Di Stefano, was, was Paul misogynistic? And I was like, well, no more so than you. I don't think that Matt is misogynistic. I think that a lot of people have misogynistic wiring in their heads. And so it doesn't matter how empowering the, women you want to be, you might still have some thoughts and some ways of seeing the world that are sexist or racist or classist or all these other things, right? So yeah, I mean, is he judging? Is he saying that men who who are labeled as effeminate, that is a penalty for, that in and of itself is punishment? To be effeminate is actually a form of punishment? I mean, the number of ways that judging people for who they are is happening here is stunning. It's stunning. But Paul is not people don't call that out. People do not see that he's just being plain rude, and because the church tradition has needed his ideas, there isn't space in a Christian space to say he's just being judgmental and rude, and he doesn't understand human realities very well. He has a very limited sense of human sexuality, human, expression, this idea that we have around gender, what is masculine, what is feminine. So therefore, this label effeminate at all, right, comes out of a binary. Um, all of that, right? I mean, it's but he's been treated like he's right. And so this scripture is used to hit, people are hitting other people over the head with this just awful stuff. And and framing it in language that says that God allowed it to happen, or God handed people over into this thing that I am now judging on God's behalf, that this is a thing that God would judge. This is a thing that I am in righteous beliefs about bodies and sex, as Paul is as Paul is stating these things, that he is passing judgment on these things that according to what God has allowed to happen. I mean, it's so convoluted and unnecessary. And continuing in verse 28, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God. Like, how many different times are you going to say it, Paul? They're not doing in life what you think they should do. They aren't worshiping the construct of God that you have. They're not worshiping that. They might be worshiping a different God. They might be thinking of God dramatically differently, actually. They might be among the people in the first century who think that the gods in the heavens are that's just crazy to think that that's real. Like, there's a wide range of people and belief systems even in the first century. And you will find jerks and really nice people in all of the groups. Having proper or the right belief system is not what makes you a good person. It's just so silly. Oh dear. I mean, Paul is, case in point, right? So, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind. And this is where I think that the judgment on sexuality is bad enough, but if it's because that's our identity, like that's an intimate part of who we are that is different from this next list, which is a whole bunch of actions, right? But so they're different, but this list is just awful in the way that it essentializes people, and you know anyway. All right, so just keep. God gave them up to a debased mind. God made it happen because they would not acknowledge him. And to things that should not be done. Now, I'm not challenging. This is a list of, for the most part, really unpleasant actions or behaviors, right? I'm not challenging that part. Goodness. But I do think it's worth considering how reasonable it is to say that God is giving people over to debased mind. God is giving people over to passions which Paul happens to think by definition are degrading. So I'm going to continue. They were filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, full of envy, right? Just entirely that, right? Murder, right? I mean, these are not great things. Strife, deceit, craftiness. They are gossips, slanderers, God haters. The footnote here says in the Greek it's God hated. I'm going to look that up because that's just crazy. God, yeah. Bad speaking. Katalalus. That's interesting. Kata is a negative, bad, and lalus is about talking. So slanderers. God haters. Theostuges. Excuse me, Theostuges. Okay. I'm not up on all the Greek. Okay. Insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, rebellious toward parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. They know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. Okay? That just. What the hell? Foolish? People who are foolish, faithless, heartless? Slanderers? Cause strife? Deserve to die? Are you kidding me, Paul? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? They know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. Yet they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them. Therefore, you have no excuse, whoever you are, when you judge others. For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. This is meant to be taken as a way to undermine everything we just walked through and talked about. No, it doesn't do that. There is no rhetorical move here that's happening that undermines the wrathful God we've just seen, that God is manipulating people, that God is judging people for who they are born as. Oh, there's no rhetorical move that's happening here that actually makes any of that okay. You say, we know that God's judgment on those who do such things is in accordance with truth. Okay. God's judgment, the wrath and the judgment. I'm going to keep reading because I just think it's helpful if we get to the verse 5. So we're into chapter 2 at this point. Do you imagine, whoever you are, that when you judge those who do such things and yet do them yourself, you will escape the judgment of God? Or do you despise the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience? I'm about to drop the F-bomb, Paul. Like, are you kidding me? You're going to talk about God's kindness, forbearance, and patience in the same breath that you've just been talking about the wrath of God being poured out on people who deserve it? What? Do you not realize that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? But by your hard and impenitent heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. God is sitting there watching and getting ready to smite out of his wrath. For he will repay according to each one's deeds. This is karma. This is a form of karma in the monotheistic tradition, right? That's all this is. The idea that you're going to get what's coming to you. The idea that if you've been a jerk in this life, God is going to make sure that justice works and plays out in the end, and you will get what's coming to you, some form of wrath, at some point. So it will have to be in the next, like after you die. That is that's the same premise behind the concept of karma. Karma, originally intended, was about your next life. so that you would behave properly in this one, knowing that you would progress toward nirvana, or progress towards being released from samsara. Like, you'll get out of this crazy wheel of life and death and rebirth, and life, death, rebirth. And right, so that your accessing release comes from your proper behavior, kind, righteous, doing all the things you're supposed to do. So there's not, you know, like, it's just exhausting, Paul. Just exhausting. So, to those who by patiently doing good seek for glory and honor and immortality, he will give eternal life. While for those who are self-seeking and who obey not the truth but wickedness, there will be wrath and fury. There will be anguish and distress for everyone who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek. But glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek, for God shows no partiality. There is nothing in this language that says you have no place in judging others. That doesn't undo all the judging that just went on in chapter 1. I'm sorry, it just does not. It also is a depiction of God that makes me very, very concerned about, because people are tolerating it. To say that someone is loving but they are also wrathful, this doesn't work, people. That just doesn't work, right? That's how people end up tolerating abusers, is well, he's nice sometimes. Right? Right? I mean, don't piss him off, but he's nice sometimes, right? God is an abusive being here in what Paul is talking about. Romans 1 makes it very clear, and we get similar content in other parts of his letters, where Paul thinks of God as an abusive being. And God is talked about as an abusive being in the Hebrew Bible. God is talked about as an abusive being in the Gospels. And Jesus, it's all over the place, people. It's all over the place. So no wonder so many people, in particular from my experiences interacting with Christians, so many people in faith communities have a hard time calling out abusive behaviors or abusive dynamics for what they are, because they've been taught how to manage that with the image of God that they have. It's just there are some really interesting shares going on here in the chat, which is, I appreciate that, all of you. Goodness, lots of things going on here. So that's all I'm doing with Romans 1 and 2. I don't want to go any farther, because then we start getting into his language about the law, and I'm not not interested in talking about that. I don't know if there was anything new for you in what I've just said, or if it's maybe just helpful to have someone name all these things that you've been very familiar with. Whatever the case, I appreciate that people are here chatting with each other, kind of supporting each other. I appreciate that so many of you are here live, who wanted to be here, able to be here. Appreciate that. Are there any questions before I wrap up? I think I've done with Romans 1 and 2 what I intended to do. God's righteous judgment. You are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. Kaboom! Like, it just, oh my gosh, it's awful. It's awful. Okay. Aw, thank you. That's really sweet, Akio. Okay, I think that's it. It's for now. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone who's here. I appreciate it. I'm gonna see if I can I have a new closing to share with you all today. So thanks for being here, and I will see you all next week with my friend and colleague, Shelley Matthews.